Francis.
Okay, I'm the chairman of the SteelOrbis group, handling all steel products.
Willie?
Yeah, my name is Willie Alf. I'm working for Duferco since December. Before, you probably seen me here on that table when I was working for another company. So I'm pretty new in Duferco group. So here we have another fellow, Michael.
Yes, I'm a fellow. My name is Michael Sutterdahl. I've been involved in the steel trading business for 35 years. And recently I'm completely by myself, and I consider myself to be a steel analyst, and I love the steel business. That's my introduction.
Okay. As I said, we had a number of questions that were submitted to us, and we will go over them one by one. We will make it as short as possible because we have heard a lot of the details that we have. We already heard this morning in other presentations here. But anyway, the first question was, question statement, that the spread between the cost of production from ore and scrap. Do you expect a balance to be reached in short term? I think there is no balance. I think the iron ore has dropped a lot more than the scrap, even though we are talking about the dropping scrap price, but iron ore has dropped dramatically. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues here to give their comments.
Michael, you've made a comment yesterday on that.
Well, I think that if people are looking for balance in between the two products, will be looking hard and long because they won't find it. Scrap is gone away from being marked to iron ore because the demand structure for scrap is different than the demand structure for iron ore. We heard earlier today that 70% of all seaborne iron ore that is mined in the world, primarily in Brazil and Australia, goes to China. So that lives its own life. And scrap is mainly consumed by long product mills in Europe and mainly by long and flat product producers in North America. So that's why those two products are not having a correlation anymore.
The second question was, what would be the bottom of the iron ore price? And I want to say once again that we heard about that in the earlier presentation. So I would say that one of the experts said this morning that it can definitely drop under $50. I talked to some iron ore person not too long ago, and they mentioned that it could go as low as $33. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's anybody in this room or in this conference that really knows where the bottom price will be for iron ore. I found it interesting to hear that the major producers in Australia and in Brazil have increased their production to bring the average cost down. And I think there is an answer to why the price is falling. Okay, any other comments there? Okay, we go to the third question here. The iron ore prices are on a downward trend and there's oversupply in the market. Australian iron ore producers, BHP and Rio Tinto, have decided to expand their production. What is their goal? Well, the short and sweet of this is they want to drive out the competition. They want to take this opportunity by producing more, bringing their costs down, and be more competitive than any other mine that they have to compete with. And I want to go quickly through these general questions because there are some trade-related questions which is of more interest to us here. Number 4 was a plethora of questions/statements, and that was really in relation to scrap prices and exports. And the questions were divided in 2 areas. And Michael, why don't you address the first one there?
Well, there's a question of where scrap and iron ore are competing directly head-to-head, and there are 2 principal areas where that's happening. One is in Turkey, inside Turkey, where Kardemir and Erdemir Group are producing from iron ore and coal, and then the rest of the long product industry is producing from scrap. Kardemir today has an extra blast furnace, which means they're putting in 1.6 million tons of additional blast furnace billets into the domestic market because Kardemir doesn't export. And therefore, in the medium term, it may be that Turkey really doesn't need to import billets from CIS or other places. So there is a split in the marketplace in Turkey today. Another place where there's a direct competition is in Egypt and the Gulf states, where you have both electric arc furnaces and DRI producers who are competing in the marketplace head-to-head. And so whichever is coming on top will depend on the price of natural gas and iron ore pellets that are being supplied into that marketplace. We also have a situation where was asking about the international scrap price. Well, a statement was made that Brazil has very low domestic scrap prices and they have started exporting. So there's scrap being exported in containers from Brazil into Asia. India has high scrap prices. They have an import tax on scrap and they continue to import. Japan, on the contrary side, has very low scrap prices and they export. And it's interesting to note that the official export price for Japanese scrap is around $220 FOB stowed, which is dramatically lower than the present situation in many countries. So that shows us that there is a propensity for lower scrap prices also in the future. China has very low domestic scrap prices, but they also import. And the reason why they import is because the domestic scrap is of very bad quality. And if another person asked about the question of will Turkey import more scrap from the United States? Well, in 2012, 2013, Turkey, United States exported around 20 million tons of scrap to Turkey. Well, in 2014, it was actually only 15 million tons. So Turkey has imported less scrap from the United States. So that means that Turkey is less of a driver of USA scrap prices. And because of the upturn in flat product prices in the United States, the scrap prices were determined more by the domestic USA industry than the export level. I guess another thing that was mentioned was that İJDAŞ, which is a major long product producer in Turkey, has decided a few months ago to invest and sign contracts to build a blast furnace. İJDAŞ has substantial electric arc furnace production. I think it's about 4.5, 5 million tons per year, all based on scrap. And they've decided to invest a substantial capital to build a blast furnace in Turkey. So that will also be a dynamic change for the future. So those are those questions.
I just wanted to add to that yes, Turkey has bought fewer tons of scrap from the US last year, but there was a general trend, and that had something to do with the drop in demand in steel. So less steel, you don't need as much in scrap. Turkey was still the largest buyer, along with South Korea and Taiwan. Those were the big three customers for US scrap. Anyway, we're moving on to trade finance. And we had a question here. According to market rumors, some European banks consider staying away from steel business. Is this true? If so, do you foresee problems in financing trading business in our industry?
You need to speak up.
I'm sorry, I was told I have to speak up. I'm sorry. Okay, let me repeat the question. According to market rumors, some European banks consider staying away from financing the steel business. Is this true? And if so, do you foresee problems in financing trading business in our industry? I would like to say the rumors, by and large, I don't know if they're true, but banks in general are getting wary of the steel business. The European banks are still, in my opinion, from my point of view, are still the driving force in financing it. But as I said, they're getting wary. It's getting harder because of the region that we are in. We have tried to bring American banks along, and we did. But it became also obvious that they don't understand the steel trading business as well as the European banks do. So for a trading company, financing is really the lifeline, and it's a challenge. We have to address it, and you have to be prepared to make changes. But it's not impossible. And I think, Michael, you had something there too, right? About the financing.
I recently made some rounds with some banks in Western Europe about availability of trade finance to new companies. And the consensus is that you can still get trade lines with $10 million if you have $1 million in your own capital. But the banks are becoming more strict in the fact that they want to know that they can generate fees for at least $200,000 a year for $10 million, and that the $10 million needs to be turned over 4 times per year, so that's $40 million. And if you meet those criteria and you have a reputation behind you, I think there's nothing that prevents to be in the steel trading business. Certain banks, of course, have had more problems in other areas than in steel and are making general cutbacks, but I don't think that reflects the availability of trade finance for steel business.
I agree to that, and I think at least our group also did not experience any such problem in the last time. We just see, of course, that the banks are pretty much more conservative compared to the time of the boom, when steel was sexy, when steel was the hype, and everybody thought now it will only go in one direction, namely up. So this bubble exploded like the real estate bubble, and I think also the bankers learned a bit, and they realized that they cannot finance every business, and that not because you are in a certain particular business field that this will bring automatically money and good results. So they are much closer watching now who is behind a transaction. The regulations are much tougher than in the past. You have to tell a good story. You have to show with your results at the end of the year that you are a partner the banks can trust on. And if the banks have the feeling that also the internal risk management is properly done, that you are not selling your steel to people you shouldn't better do that, and that you are not doing crazy long positions, short positions, and so on, then they are still happy to finance, because with the present interest rates you get on your bank, I mean, there is no sense to leave the money in the bank account. We had times, I don't know, 10 years ago, where actually my boss said, well, with these results you should better put the money into a bank account, and we earn more interest than the 2% profit or 1.5% profit on that transaction. This is not the case anymore. Today, if you are lucky, you get 0.25, 0.5 on your 3 years investment. So, of course, the money is now looking for an alternative, and the banks need this financing, because it's not only the preparation of money and the providing of funds, but it's also a letter of credit, a bank guarantee, and moving money. And I think they have more money than we all think, and especially in Europe now, with all these bonds which are bought by the European bank. This money has to get into the system, and I think for the bank it's good to invest there, but they will watch more carefully than they have done in the past.
That is absolutely true, and I would like to add, from an American point of view, in years past we have always talked about in this committee about a credit crunch, and we certainly had a credit crunch during the 2008-2009 crisis. I don't see that credit crunch anymore. Credit is available. That's one of the reasons, in my opinion, that the American economy is doing relatively well. And I can vouch for it, that credit is there. It's just there are fairly new players in there, and we have to educate them. Willie Call said you have to tell a good story. It's just they have to get used to the nuances of steel trading, which for an American bank is not easy. But credit is available, and so credit IRA, I think it's not a problem, or it's not a big problem, as big a problem as it was in 2008 and 2009, right? Okay.
But Bernd,
I just want to add one thing. At least what we see, let's say the banks are certainly not going away from the steel trade. The only main problem we are facing today is the compliance rules, which really start to be completely crazy. You cannot sell to this country, you cannot do this. That is the main problem. Credit is not the problem, the compliance is, as far as I'm concerned, the main issue today.
Bernd, just let me add, when I said you have to tell them a good story, that does not mean that it should be just a nice story, but it should be a nice business.
I just wanted to okay. But what Francis said, I can vouch for it as well. The compliance conditions on those loans in the US by American banks are a little bit different than we were used to it from European banks. That is true. So, anyway, that's about trade finance. If anybody from the floor wants to add something from their point of view, from their experience, be my guest. All right, moving on
to Europe.
We're going now to the regions. There was a number of comments, questions about regions. The first one was about Europe, and it points out that after the Ukraine signed an association agreement with the European Union, shipments of Ukrainian origin steel products into the EU jumped dramatically. Will the EU take measures to curb these imports? If so, when and what measures? And they also, I think we should address all three at the same time. In addition, the UK is chromium-added rebar from China getting traction in other parts of Europe in addition to the UK? And how big is the impact of the weaker euro against the US dollar in trading, on trading in European markets? So I think I'll let you start first, Willie.
Yeah. Well, the Ukraine, or if the EU will take measures, I doubt, because if they sign an association agreement and giving the fact how much of steel, at least in our long products, have entered Europe so far, I think this is really meaningless. There is not much. I even don't know whether there is any mill right now holding for Rebar's certification. Wire rod eventually, but also look at their logistics. They are sitting not really perfectly well for the areas the market could be for them, which is more the northern hemisphere of Europe, Germany, Netherlands, maybe United Kingdom, and the European destinations which they could serve with their or from their base are not really areas which request a lot of imported material. So I don't think that there will be much of imports at all, unless someone tells me it is already. I haven't seen it, at least for rebars. And with regard to the weaker dollar, of course, we've seen very, very clearly that the imports from dollar-oriented countries such as China, such as Turkey, has gone down dramatically, because it's simply a huge difference of up to 25% compared to previous prices. The European mills still have to pay the scrap which they are importing in euros, which means in dollar terms it becomes, or transferred into euros, it becomes more expensive for them. So the local prices are pretty stable. There is no import pressure. At the same time, there are lots of opportunities to export, which we've seen already from European mills shipping to America, to Africa in much bigger scale than in the past. So certainly the weak euro has an enormous impact on the trade flow within the European community. On this CR added rebar, well, China has so far only an homologation for United Kingdom, CARES. There is no other homologation in place that I'm aware of. I don't think that this CR adding or not adding will have any impact in their aim to continue doing this business under the CARES scheme, and certainly CARES is fully aware of what has to be added to the steel and what not, and what can be added. And we discussed yesterday already that whether they take off the chrome and have a other tariff or not, really, if they want to export, they will export, and they will make the price which is needed in order to sell to those markets which are available. What will be the consequence and what will be the measures then, in particular for China? That is certainly a different animal than compared to Ukraine, because I think the threat from China can become extremely big, and we see it on flat roll products already. On long products it will also come, but let's not forget, if someone wants to inflate or conquer the European market, they need 26 homologations. It's something which you hardly can handle. It's an enormous time effort. It's very complicated, and if anyone really goes on for so many homologations, always with the threat that an anti-dumping can happen tomorrow, this is very questionable. So UK CARES is just because they needed that for the Middle East area in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, where CARES is common standard. So they had to apply for that anyway. And so all of a sudden the pound is of interest compared to the euro. So business makes sense, and they do it. If the pound goes down tomorrow, well, then also that business will dry out. So I don't think the European mills should be really afraid of this China rebar price and a potential threat, because I can hardly believe that anyone will apply for a homologation to Spain.
Okay. Do you want to add anything to it?
Well, during a discussion yesterday, I was told that apparently they are looking to a possibility to have the anti-dumping on the steel bars, but only for UK. Up to now, every time when anti-dumping was introduced, it was for the whole of the EEC, and it seems that they might have found a way to do it only for UK, and that it could be, some people say, very imminent.
Okay.
But okay, nobody knows.
Is there anyone in this room who knows if such an anti-dumping for one member of the European community is possible under European laws?
I thought not, but I was told yesterday that it might be possible.
Would be a good question to raise.
I think you should ask lawyers of anti-dumping in Brussels.
I have a comment about that.
Yeah.
Where I think you're headed is that there's concern in the rest of the European Union because of the bilateral trade that they have with China, of becoming an aggressor in an otherwise matter of rebar that doesn't come to Europe. So in other words, the UK doesn't have the support of the rest of the European community for something that's specific that affects the UK only. So there's unlikely support that the rest of the European Union would support an anti-dumping action, which would include the UK. Therefore, the UK is sort of forced to find a way to go it on its own. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I did not suggest anything.
What support would be required from the European Union?
What support? Well, I was just asking if anyone knows if it is possible under European laws and regulations, if it is possible that one member of the EU is able to put an anti-dumping against one third country, let's say China, yeah, and that this only counts for this one member state, but not for the rest, yeah, because as Francis said, usually then anti-dumping, like for wire rod, is for the whole European community, yeah, in order to prevent that the steel comes into Germany and then moves all the way around Eastern Europe, because once it is in any member state, it is freely sellable. Yeah? So that's why I wonder if it is at all possible to put an anti-dumping for UK only, but not for the rest of Europe.
Willem, I was at a conference a few weeks ago where there was a Belgian attorney that was discussing the various 12 trade cases that were on the overhead screen here this morning. And she said that Brussels was working with the UK in order to put the paperwork together for filing a case against China for deformed rebars into UK. But there's nothing that precludes that you can do that, but you have to get the European Commission to agree. And so if Italy says no, and Spain says no, and Germany says no, then it's not going to happen. Yeah. But then again, the UK is under elections now, and they're talking about leaving the EU, so maybe they use this as a way to keep them within the EU. So
I guess the bigger question is that there's a sense of cooperation and non-antagonistic behavior between the EU and China. In other words, there's no particular anti-dumping case against wire rods, for example, in the EU.
Yes, there is.
There is.
Yeah.
There is an anti-dumping on wire rods, but on rebars, I don't think so.
No.
But yet, no rebar. But you're saying because of the homologation, that's the reason.
Yeah, correct.
So there's nothing more complicated. It's just simply they can't get it because CARES applies to the UK from Dubai, and therefore it's an opportunity.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
but
so
theoretically, as Willem said, if it would only be anti-dumping in the UK, I think that legally you could import it in Belgium and then send it to UK without anti-dumping.
Because of open borders.
Yes.
yeah, because of free border trade.
Theoretically, theoretically.
All right. The next point refers to the US. The question was, how do you rate the importance of the US economic growth and the market demand for short-term well-being of the global steel industry? I'm a little bit biased since I am in the US. I mean, I think the American steel market is very important for the global steel industry. That's why just about everybody likes to sell in the US, be it rebars, be it wire rod. And that's also the reason why the American steel industry is so busy with anti-dumping suits. Michael made the point yesterday. He made the point yesterday that if you take it in a global context, as this questioner did, the American market isn't all that big. We have 100 million tons of steel that we make in a year, and China makes about 850 million tons. And we make 100 million tons. So I mean, the American market is not such a big fish anymore in the pond. But I think the American economic well-being still is very important to the rest of the world in terms of steel. Any other comments? Since we are talking about the American long product market, I just would like to share real quick with some numbers, since we don't have a presentation for the American market this year. Our rebar market last year was actually relatively strong. We imported 1.5 million tons of rebars from all over the world, which is pretty much higher than in the last 2 to 3 years, where we were under 1 million tons. The largest importer, I'm sorry, I have to re-advise it. We imported 1.3 million tons of rebars, and still a good year because we were under 1 million tons in the years prior. Turkey, to nobody's surprise, is not only the biggest importer, I can almost say almost the only importer. Turkey had 897,000 tons. And after Turkey, Spain had 128,000 tons, and Japan came in with 99,000 tons. Mexico, of course, had to drop out because of the dumping suit. And in the first 3 months of this year, meaning from January, February, and until last week, it's a combination of our census numbers and of the actual imports number in the first 2 months, the census numbers and the import license numbers. Turkey, again, is the largest importer with 380,000 tons. And the only other country that showed imports so far is Japan. Japan is on the books, and these numbers from the Departments of Commerce with 78,000 tons so far. We have a grand total of 478,000 tons for not quite the first quarter, because as I said, those numbers go for until the end of last week. On wire rod, it was a fairly normal year with 1.5 million tons. In total, China dropped out, still had 341,000 tons last year, but the biggest imports came from Canada, 397,000 tons. And it was interesting to see how the Turkish mills, who had really shifted all their efforts in years past, more or less, as far as long products are concerned, to rebars, they came back a little bit because China dropped out. Turkey had 200,000 tons. And I think they will have a little bit more this year, because in the first not quite 3 months, they have 101,000 tons already on the books for the US. So that's a quick overview about numbers in the American rebar/wire rod market. The Department of Commerce, in their statistics, they do mention prices. I don't trust them. I think I mentioned that many times before. It's the government. How can that be right? I mean, but I look at the prices to see the trend. And all I can tell you is that according to the numbers that they had in December, to the numbers they had in March, the Turkish rebar price went down by $51 a ton. These are published numbers, so I can talk about it. And the Japanese price from December to the latest numbers in March went down by $70 per metric ton. On the wire rod side, we have similar numbers. The largest importer, as I said, is Canada. The price went down $76. And the Turkish wire rod price, according to those numbers, went down $87 per metric ton. So I think the trend is there. We all know scrap has fallen. Prices have fallen, and it's reflected in those numbers. Okay, we're going to Latin America now. There was a question. Latin American demand for long products seems to be increasing. Would there be an opposition from local authorities against this trend in terms of any sort of protectionism or any other means? I can say that out of my own experience, as far as Mexico is concerned, there's always a possibility of dumping suits, because they can do it fast. The process there doesn't take as long as in the US, and sometimes when the imports get too high, there could be dumping suits there. Yes, I agree with the questioner here, with the person who asked that question. Latin American imports for long products have increased quite a bit, particularly from our point of view, Peru and Colombia. Brazil is a little bit in a crisis. so imports or exports to Brazil are not quite as lively, but there is I see a lot of trade in finished goods in intra Latin America from Colombia to Brazil, for instance, and indirectly that helps us too. Any other comments there, Michael?
Well, I think one of the major concerns for 2015 is the recession in Brazil. And since Brazil is a commodity country, their currency is going to be under pressure for the balance of this year unless there's some dramatic changes on iron ore pricing. So there's no motor in the Latin American market, especially in light of the country of Venezuela imploding on itself.
Yeah, yeah, right.
No, I have nothing to add.
Well, then finally, of course, there's no session, be it ours or any other session without China, of course. I mean, everything is about China. How do you think China's steel exports will be affected by increasing protectionism globally? I think we all have seen the effect in the last year to year and a half, as China was shut out of the US with wire rod. They had been shut out with rebars for the longest time. Now they're being shut out of the Canadian market as well. They have to, in rebars, they have to look for other markets, and they go to other markets. And I think we all have seen wherever the Chinese went. They even went to Turkey and exported wire rod to Turkey, I understand. It's like coal to Newcastle. But anyway, I mean, we have all suffered with the Chinese expansion into the other markets, and they tore up the prices. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that.
I'll ask a question.
Yep.
So, do you think that because the Chinese are exporting into these other markets, that there's a need, therefore, that these exporters, let's say, ones from Boston, and must be people, so they lower the price?
Yeah, sure.
Therefore, the Chinese have brought down the rest of international.
Yes, that's my opinion. Yes, absolutely. Because you have to, if you want to keep your market shares, you have to compete with the Chinese, and that means in most cases you have to come up with a better price.
So then that first part about protectionism, do you think that that's imminent? Each country would put in their own, whether it's an anti-dumping case or whether it's a requirement for a special bureau to inspect the mill, something that would make it illegal or more difficult for other than the domestic mills to sell in their own country. Do you think that there would be a situation like that in the domestic industry, aside from using trade cases protectionism, to set up some other barriers?
I make a comment. The most recent rebar dumping case that was confirmed was Australia. And Australia has been able to keep out Chinese rebars for many years by basically spreading rumors that the material was no good. And then finally, because of the price disparity in between Australian rebar and Chinese rebar, finally it came in. And now a dumping case has been confirmed, and I think that the dumping margin is 20% to 40% or something like that. But the Australian government went off after all importers. And even Spain got caught dumping on selling spool deformed rebars into Australia. And so some countries are using the situation to attack all imports at the same time, and some are specifically targeting China.
I think we have already a very good trade barrier in Europe by these 26 different homologation schemes, because I remember 5 or 6 years ago we had also a session like that, and I said, just imagine if we would have one Euro standard. So can you imagine, at that time it was Turkey, then it was Russia, then now it's China, and God knows who will be the next. And with just one homologation, you can enter a market of more than 450 million people, a market of, I don't know, 25 million tons of rebars consumption, with old equipment, with logistics in Europe, which are absolutely bizarre. Some mills are in the middle of the mountains, some mills are far away in nowhere land. Yeah, and then you have steel mills producing 8 million tons of rebars, 30 million tons of long products every year at the shore with low costs, low energy, low raw material costs. I mean, then this industry would be gone very soon. Yeah. Then, of course, would be the next, if you make an anti-dumping or trade measurements in order to prevent from that. Yeah. But ultimately, we really have to think what will be the future in this trade barriers, in this protectionism we have. I mean, it's sometimes like in this book, the weavers, who are destroying the steam machine because they are afraid about their jobs. And sometimes it looks to me that Europe is very similar behaving. We are sticking to a very old industry for reinforcing bars, which is the most ordinary steel you can produce. With high energy costs, we don't want to have nuclear power stations anymore. We want to do it with wind energy and with recycle energy and God knows what. As I said, the mills are sometimes in the middle of nowhere land, yeah, so the whole logistic importing of scrap, iron or whatever is extremely expensive, but still we stick to that because there are a couple of thousand jobs behind. But I think Europe showed and proved many, many times over the last decades and centuries that we are more able to invent new things and to go in these energy business and energy inventions which really bring us forward. Yeah? Electronic cars, all sorts of machinery and techniques. But still, a market which has, I don't know, 300 labor force working in one factory producing 500,000 tons of rebars. They rather protect their country from imports of rebars rather than to say, okay, it's over, boys. But still, steel has an enormous power and maybe also psychological feeling with many politicians and the whole industry that we cannot lose our steel industry. We cannot give everything to the Chinese. Yeah, but I mean, we gave everything to Japan with the electronic years ago. We give everything now to China also on these raw earths. Is it? Rare earths. Yeah, so we are depending on them anyway. And if we build up these trade cases, let's assume China would say, look, you don't get these rare earths anymore. We stop that, and you get only 20% of what you bought last year. They can turn it around, and we are more depending on their resources rather than they are depending on us, I think. Yeah. And so it will be interesting to see how this develops and whether those trade measurements, the one or the other way, by protectionism or by standards and things like that, whether this is really the right answer to such a status quo we have. We cannot believe that China will just scrap 400 million tons of steel capacity just to get a balance to the rest of the world. Why they should?
Well, and the other issue as far as China is concerned, of course, and there were a couple of questions here, that's regarding to the export rebates that you could get when you on the export rebates for the boron added steel or chromium added steel. And the question was here specifically, has China stopped exporting wire rod in light of the recent new regulations directing export on boron added steel? And from my experience, I can say no, not really. They don't like it if they don't get the rebate, but they will not walk away from any orders. So they even supply sometimes still boron added steel. Boron costs a little bit, is an additional cost, but many markets, actually, in my opinion, the global market has gotten used to the nice boron added steel in wire rod, which makes for very easy drawing. So no, they have not stopped doing that, in my opinion. And I don't think it will make the change in regulations will make that much of a difference.
Well, I think what we have seen is that, unfortunately, the boron-added wire rod price went down after the tax rebate was abolished. And even if there was not this tricky chromium business, even if they charge the cost of the boron, they're still the cheapest in the world. They might become closer to Ukraine or any other origin, but they're still the cheapest in the world.
Well, they have then tried to add, in order to get around it, because the way I understand it, you still get the export rebate if you put chromium or any other kind of alloy in there. But chromium is not as well liked in wire rod, at least, as boron. So, and again, I don't think at this point it doesn't make much difference there. Will the measures imposed by the government in China solve the oversupply problem in China, or should we be prepared for even higher steel output in China? I think we heard this morning that from a couple of people that who expect that the steel output in China will stagnate in the next few years and even may go down for a little bit for the first time. So will we face ever more oversupply out of China? From what I saw this morning, probably not in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, I think this will, of course, a lot depend on the local demand. You can reduce your capacity, but if the local demand goes down, and this is, in my opinion, a little bit expected, the pressure for export will certainly continue, I think.
Mm-hmm. So, and the final question here, oil. IREPAS has stated that falling oil prices have a negative impact on steel demand. Do you expect any recovery in oil prices this year?
No.
Unlikely.
I'm not the expert. I don't think so, from what I hear, from what I read. But again, I'll open it up for the audience as well. If you can chime in here. I personally don't see there will be a dramatic recovery in the oil prices. It may go up a little bit, but it will not be back to the $100 a barrel price. As I looked it up in preparation for this question, the rig count, that seems to be the gospel in the US, the rig count in January has gone down by 734 active rigs from the same time last year. So that shows you a little bit that yes, there is less production of oil. If you apply economic principles, it should go up. But then again, there is still a lot of supply from those rigs that do work. So overall, in my opinion, this year, no dramatic increase. But this is coming from a Rebar sales guy. So
I'd like to say something about this, that steel consumption is not directly dependent on oil pricing or oil or energy investments. It's directly dependent on GDP growth. And the speaker this morning mentioned that overall, in the rest of the world outside of China, steel consumption grew by 1% last year, and the steel consumption grew in China by 1%. And so I've read other reports stating that in order to increase steel consumption by 1%, you need to have a GDP growth of 2.5%. And I think that's the challenge. So indirectly, if the energy investments in the world lead to lower GDP growth, then obviously it leads to less growth in steel consumption. But if we can reach that magic 2.5% GDP growth on average in the world, we should be able to look forward to a slow steel consumption growth.
those were all the questions that we had here. And again, I mean, if anybody here wants to add something, if we said something that he doesn't agree with, he or she doesn't agree with, I would like to hear it, please. Okay. Well, I can tell you all want to have a cup of coffee outside. So why don't we adjourn our committee meeting here? Thank you very much for attending it. And we'll see you in the fall time in Rome again. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Okay.